Thousands of young athletes are at risk.
A full-out brain injury, it fundamentally changes who you are.
And it could lead to death.
Never do you expect to be like, okay, what if that were to happen to me? Never.
The state created laws to address it.
This is a serious issue.
But some laws are not being followed.
I'm as guilty as anybody else.
Parents and players wanting to take risks.
We get a lot of pushback from parents. It's unreal. They want their kid to play, and they don't, for some reason, they don't believe that they're putting their child at risk.
Good evening and welcome to this Target 7 special investigation, Abe's Last Play. I'm Doug Fernandez.
And I'm Shelley Rabando. More than 21,000 kids play high school sports in New Mexico on courts and fields, and they rely on their coaches, their schools, and each other to keep them safe.
In New Mexico, there are laws coaches and schools must follow to ensure the safety of athletes. But our investigation found not everyone is following the rules, and many athletes could be in danger.
And one of those athletes lost his life last year. His name was Abe Romero, and he died after making what seemed like a routine tackle.
Tonight, you are going to meet Abe's family, hear his story, and see his last play. Here's John Cardinelli.
In the northeast side of Las Cruces, a parking spot sits empty.
He was always really funny.
The spot reserved for Abe Romero.
He was just competitive at anything.
Number 22 on the Organ Mountain football team.
His passion for football showed up, and that was it.
But the reserved parking spot will remain empty.
Abraham's not here, but we're always gonna remember him.
Empty, just like his mother's heart.
Like there's no words that I could say to explain what it feels to lose your kid, regardless of whatever situation you lose him in. It's horrible. It's the worst pain possible.
Elizabeth Alonzo is still searching for comfort. Sometimes she finds that in Abe's old room.
There's times that I just can't even open the door. I'm like, sorry, Abe, like, I just can't today.
Elizabeth has turned her son's room into a sanctuary.
Everything in here is Abraham. That's his backpack he would wear on a daily basis.
Abe's belongings scattered around.
His Leatherman jacket that he only wore one time.
And one particular item.
This is the actual uniform that he had on the Deming game.
Has its own story. This is the field Abe wore that jersey for the last time. Right now, it's empty, waiting for the start of a new high school football season. On August 26, 2022, this field was packed. The Organ Mountain Knights traveled from Las Cruces to take on their rivals.
Oh, nice throw.
Scott Hood covered the game for the online sports website Red Zone New Mexico. He took game footage and this picture of Abe Romero walking out for the coin toss.
Abe Romero was one of the captains for Organ Mountain, and so he was there.
His mother was sitting in these stands.
It was like any other out-of-town game. You know, we hardly ever would miss a game. So, you know, everything looked normal.
Wearing number 22, Abe was playing both linebacker and running back for the Knights.
And he had a good night going. It was a tight, close, hard-fought game.
Even though some thought he was short.
And how tall was Abe?
5'4".
Abe was tough and was involved in nearly every play. Some of them key, like this interception in the first quarter, and another in the second quarter when he made this tackle on third down. It would be one of his last.
He kind of like, you know, kind of stumbled when he first got up, but then, you know, the whole adrenaline, I suppose, kept them going.
The very next play, Abe was ready to block the punt. He's lined up right here at the end. He tried to get the ball and was not even involved in the play.
And Abraham starts walking towards like the whole opposite direction. He takes a couple of steps and he kind of loses balance and he just falls. At that moment, I was like, okay, he got a cramp. A few seconds, start passing, he doesn't move. A couple minutes starts passing, he doesn't move. And at that point, I just lost it. I knew that something was really wrong.
Abe started having seizures.
And they probably looked at him they examined him for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then they called for the ambulance. And the ambulance came out on the field and took Abe away.
So I just remember running towards the field, And by the time that I got there, there was, several of the coaches around Abraham, and I just remember going to the field and telling him, Abe, I'm here, like, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine, you're not alone, we're here with you. But that was it.
The game resumed, and the Knights pulled out the victory without their captain.
Which to me shows that at the time, in the moment, people really, I don't think, understood the severity of the injury he had suffered.
Abe was taken to this Deming Hospital and then flown to El Paso. There, he would remain in a coma.
I kind of knew that my son was not going to get any better. And as the days passed, there was not signs of him, recuperating or anything. So it was really hard. It was really hard to just see him there.
The entire community rallied behind him, hoping he would wake up.
Seeing all those gestures of love towards Abraham, it would just fill my heart.
So how long was he in the hospital in total?
22 days. The same number on his jersey.
His team carried his photo out to every coin toss as if their captain was still there. His mom, holding his hand, watching the games on an iPad.
I would have given anything to have Abraham back. And at that point, I couldn't do anything. It was just him there, laying.
Abe never woke up. He was taken to a hospice in Las Cruces where he died with his mother by his side. No one thought that just 22 days earlier in Deming, Abe would make his last play. An autopsy was never done on Abe. Using his medical records, the Office of the Medical Investigator determined that Abe died due to blunt head trauma.
It's like if he were in a motorcycle accident, not in a high school game.
Through an open records request, Target 7 obtained this report from OMI. Much of it was redacted. It says there was bleeding under the membrane, causing the brain to shift and swell.
In sports, contact sports in high school, for a lethal hit to the head, that is very unlikely.
Not common at all.
Not common at all.
Dr. Robert Alunde is a neurologist at the University of New Mexico Hospital. He did not treat Abe.
A seizure occurring is not a symptom of a concussion. That is a symptom of a severe traumatic brain injury. That is outside of that realm of the normal concussions that we've been talking about.
Dr. Alunde said a series of concussions, however, can cause a traumatic brain injury.
So when your son was in the hospital, did the doctors believe that he had had prior concussions?
They believe he did.
Do we know how many?
No.
Elizabeth said weeks before the game, her son had complained about his head hurting. But according to her knowledge, he had never been checked for a concussion or told to sit.
Did he ever tell his coaches about his head hurting?
I am not sure. I'm not sure about that.
We reached out to Abe's coach, Stephen Castile. He declined to do an interview. He told us over the phone that he was not aware of Abe having any other concussions during the season, nor did Abe ever complain to him about his head hurting. Castile has since left Organ Mountain.
Do you think at all that your son's death could have been avoided?
I believe there could have been some things different. Previous to Abraham's incident, there was never no kids sent on concussions.
New Mexico passed a series of laws that addresses how schools should handle possible concussions. But our investigation found that not everyone is following the law. In addition, some players try to hide their concussion symptoms, and equipment that could be used to reduce concussions is not always being used.
We have more to reveal in our Target 7 special investigation.
Players who want to play, they do not like being pulled out. And when you tell them they're out for 10 days or longer, they're usually upset.
A lot of the things have been taken out of coaches' hands regarding concussions now. You'd like to see the training kind of evolve with it, and that just hasn't happened.
Senator, do you think we need more legislation when it comes to the topic of concussions?
Prior to Abe Romero's last play, Abe told his mother his head had been hurting.
But it wasn't until Abe was in the hospital that doctors told her they believed he had prior concussions that happened before Abe suffered that final blow that would ultimately end his life.
Experts told us our state has some of the best laws in the country to prevent players from suffering serious brain injury.
So what slipped through the cracks, and could this happen again in New Mexico? Here's John Cardinelli.
This is just an example of a normal CAT scan of the head.
Earlier, we introduced you to Dr. Robert Alunde. He specializes in neurocritical care at the University of New Mexico Hospital.
This is an example of an MRI done 6 weeks after their injury.
He's explaining what the brain looks like after sustaining a concussion.
There was a little bit of microbleeding, a tiny little bit of bleeding within the tissue of the brain.
Dr. Alunde says recognizing symptoms of a concussion early is the key to recovery.
So the symptoms of concussion can be as simple as losing consciousness on the hit and then waking back up again. Could be headaches, could be nausea, could be problems with your balance, could be disorientation.
But recognizing when a player gets a concussion is not always easy. During a typical high school football game in New Mexico, players are taking hit after hit after hit.
Just like what happened to Abe Romero before his last play. Before suffering a fatal hit last year, Abe was involved in more than 35 plays. He ran the ball, made tackles, and tried to block punts.
Those kids put everything in that field. It was like a normal game. There was nothing that was odd from the game.
His mother and his coach believe the play that might have killed him came much earlier. It was here in the first quarter when he's tackled while running the ball. He fumbled.
He gets up, he continues playing for a couple of minutes, and just by looking at that, that piece of film and how he landed, how the whole, play was going, I was like, wow, Abraham, you still managed to keep on going.
Abe's coach told Target 7 Romero said nothing about his head hurting during the game or after the play. And athletic trainers say speaking up is a common problem for players.
Do athletes try to hide concussions so they can continue to play in a game?
Absolutely. It's very, very common.
And how dangerous is that?
Oh, it's incredibly dangerous.
In 2016, a law was passed requiring coaches take concussion training at the start of each season. In addition, it also requires players to sit out for 10 days after suffering a concussion. And the next year, in 2017, the law was expanded to include students, requiring them to take their own training.
Senator Bill Soules sponsored the bill, adding the requirement for student athletes.
And it was decided that even just watching a video about what the symptoms are, how to diagnose within yourself whether it's you had a concussion or not, was enough to be helpful.
Ironically, at the time he wrote the legislation, he was teaching at the same school Abe attended. One of his students gave him the idea to expand training to everyone.
And she told the whole class, the coaches have to have concussion awareness training, the officials have to have concussion awareness training, certainly the athletic trainers do. Nobody tells the students.
It's unclear if Abe was intentionally masking his symptoms. It's likely we'll never know. We do know he followed the state law. Here is the certificate showing he completed his training a month before his last play.
And when it comes to concussion laws, how strong is New Mexico's?
The good news, at least from a national perspective, is that we know that every state in the U.S. except one, which is not New Mexico, does have concussion laws in place in some form.
Dr. Rebecca Stearns is the chief operating officer for the Corey Stringer Institute. Based in Connecticut, the institute was named after the last NFL player to die on the field. The organization tracks policy that affects athlete safety across the country.
When someone returns too soon from a concussion, that concussion could potentially be life-threatening if they haven't fully recovered.
According to the Institute, New Mexico is one of 10 states that has a law requiring football coaches to take concussion training yearly.
But we do believe that a lot of these coaching education programs are really effective programs.
But still, there are many flaws. Target 7 took the required coaches training through the National Federation of High School Sports, the same training the New Mexico Activities Association requires. Under state law, it's up to the NMAA to establish the policies for coaches and students to follow.
Welcome to Concussion in Sports on the NFHS Learning Center.
It took us about 40 minutes and covers how to spot concussions,
Student looks dazed or stunned.
what to do if a coach suspects one,
They should be watched for worsening symptoms.
and when they should call 911.
Loss of consciousness, even if brief.
At the end, it asks you 9 questions. Once you pass, you get a certificate like this.
It's very effective if they take it serious, if they listen, pay attention, and believe what they're learning.
Daryl Wooten is an athletic trainer for Mountain View Hospital in Las Cruces. He also works as a consultant to the school district, the same school district in which Abe was enrolled. He says the test is too easy to complete.
And you can just skim through the information and retake the test over and over and over again till you pass it.
And there are other issues. Coaches have told us the training is out of date.
I think it's good for new coaches, coaches who've never been around before. The concussion training doesn't change every year. It's the same videos, it's the same information, and I would say that concussions have evolved and some of the things, and we're missing some of that piece.
Brandon Back is the athletic director and head football coach at La Cueva High School.
So there's a lot of things that have changed that are not in that training, and you kind of don't get that until you get the experience of just being here for a number of years.
Even with the test's flaws, Target 7 found Coach Back and many other coaches in the state share something in common when it comes to the test.
When we return,
We did find that coaches had not taken their training in some cases for some years, right? What do you think about that? Now, the NMAA tells us it's not their responsibility to make sure that coaches take that required training. What do you think about that?
There is a lot being done to help protect young athletes in New Mexico from getting concussions.
following the death of Abe Romero, the Las Cruces School District started using special helmet protectors for their athletes.
Laws have been passed in New Mexico that require coaches to take a concussion test.
But why are some not using this equipment or following the law? Whose job is it to make sure these rules are followed?
And was Abe wearing the right helmet? Once again, here's John Cardinale.
Earlier, we introduced you to La Cueva High School's athletic director and head varsity football coach, Brandon Back.
The more knowledge we have on concussions and how concussions affect students' lives and how they can overcome them and how they can avoid them, the safer the game gets.
Part of that knowledge comes from a state law we told you about earlier. It was passed in 2016 and 2017, requiring coaches and students take this concussion training each year. But during our interview with Coach Back, he told us this.
But to be honest with you, I'm as guilty as anybody else of not having proper training and staying up on things that I should have been. And so we've all got to do a better job of making sure that we're taking those trainings and we're doing those things and we're putting ourselves in a good position.
Back is one of about 150 varsity football coaches in the state who did not take the tests prior to the start of last football season. Target 7 looked up the names of all varsity high school football coaches in the state through a website that is used by the New Mexico Activities Association for rostering and scheduling. We then searched their records through the National Federation of High Schools. That's where NMAA requires coaches take the training. We found that of the 500 varsity football coaches listed on the rosters, 31% had not taken the test prior to the 2022 football season.
What are your thoughts on that statistic?
I think that's concerning.
Well, that goes to enforcement, really.
It's in the law, so we should be encouraging them to get that number higher.
We took our results to coaches and athletic directors. One of them was Ernie Viramontes. He's the head athletic director for Las Cruces Public Schools, the same district in which Abe Romero was enrolled before he suffered that final fatal blow during a football game last season. Physicians believe Abe had prior undiagnosed concussions.
I think we need to all make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to.
We provided Viramontes with our data. Abe's coach did take the training a few weeks before Abe's last play. However, the district had one coach who had not completed the training.
Looking at the list that we gave us, I think we had a few, and thank you, because that's something that I can follow up with now and see what the list of the coaches. It might have been, were they there and didn't do it? Were they there and then they didn't coach? But it gives me a good idea.
After our interview, the district sent us this email informing us they had made some of their coaches take the training immediately.
We also reached out to Albuquerque Public Schools, the state's largest school district.
Their athletic director, Adrian Ortega, declined to do an interview. Our research found that about 36% of APS varsity football coaches were not in compliance with state law last season. So we caught up with Ortega during the district's media day.
What are your thoughts? I have no comment on that.
We then showed our data to APS Superintendent Scott Elder.
If we were out of compliance, we will quickly get into compliance.
When we told him we had found coaches from his district who admitted not taking the training, he said this.
That's not okay.
After we presented our data to APS and the NMAA, we noticed coaches like Back started taking the test.
The buck stops with us as head coaches, and that's something that we're just going to have to take ownership on, that we made that mistake.
But who is responsible for making sure people take the test? We asked NMAA Director Sally Marquez.
That is a school decision, so that is done at the school level, and the athletic directors keep those at their office and make sure that they are doing following state statute.
Does the NMAA believe there needs to be any further rules to make sure that coaches are taking the required training?
No, I think the schools do a good job to make sure that they are taking it. Our athletic directors are really very good athletic directors.
The law does not require the NMAA to enforce who takes the training. Earlier, we introduced you to Senator Bill Soules. He's one of the legislators who wrote the concussion law. He says NMAA should take a bigger role.
The NMAA overall of all of athletics should have some responsibility to ensure that it's being followed.
The law does not address what should happen if a coach does not take the test.
Should there be any punishment for coaches that are shown to not have taken the training?
I don't know whether there should be punishments unless they are purposefully not taking it, whether they're willfully not doing it.
Target 7 found other states like Texas require all school districts to have a concussion oversight team that is headed by at least one physician. Those oversight teams check for proof of concussion training.
Is that something New Mexico needs?
At this time, I believe it needs to go back to school, local autonomy. It is on the schools.
Some club sports like youth soccer might have a solution. The New Mexico Youth Soccer Association requires coaches and referees to take concussion training as well. Gloria Faber, the executive director for NMYSA, says coaches have to have a card like this for them to be on the sidelines. They can't get a pass card if they've not taken the training. The referees check the cards.
If a coach doesn't, then they shouldn't be allowed to be on the bench with the players, and then they need to contact our office in order to get that.
But there is more that can still be done besides training.
So how do Guardian helmets like this help prevent injuries?
When contact is made, it absorbs some of the impact, reducing the amount of stress and forces placed on the skull.
After Abe died, Las Cruces schools started using these special pads that go over helmets during practice. Earlier, we introduced you to athletic trainer Daryl Wooten. He works with the school district.
It's certainly a help. It's better than nothing.
They've been used by the NFL at practices, and their website claims they reduce impact by 33%.
Since we started using this in Centennial High School, our concussions during practice have basically been eliminated.
But here in New Mexico, not all schools are using them.
No one's wearing them in games. Why is that?
I would have to say it's the culture of the sport. I mean, we can't look soft wearing a big old bunny helmet on top of our helmets.
Target 7 has learned that following Abe's death, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission launched an investigation into Abe's helmet. They sent this email to Las Cruces Public Schools, asking a series of questions about the helmet. Target 7 was able to obtain these photos of Abe's helmet he wore when he collapsed. Although many football helmets have been recalled over the past several years, Abe's was not one of them. His helmet was 2 years old and was recently recertified. In fact, his helmet has been rated as one of the safest by many laboratories.
You learn from things that happen, then it's good to evaluate how can we get better.
Just before Abe's death, the district hired a series of athletic trainers and put 2 of them in every school. But not all New Mexico schools have athletic trainers on the sidelines. Our investigation found that rural schools struggle to staff them.
So that you understand,
Sure.
In New Mexico, I would say less than 30% of our schools have athletic trainers. We do not have enough trainers. We have openings for athletic trainers and we cannot fill them.
During this investigation, there's one person's voice you haven't heard, and that's Abe Romero's.
We have a motto, change the culture. We're trying to make things different in Organ Mountain.
That was Abe being interviewed less than a week before his last play. His mother says he always had a vision.
He wanted to make a difference. He wanted to change the way things have been for years.
Elizabeth Alonso hopes her son's story can continue to create change. She wants someone to make sure coaches are taking the test, players wear safer equipment, and parents like her are also trained on concussions.
If we can avoid another kid going through this, another family going through this, we're gonna try to do as much as possible.
Changes that can be put in place so parents like her don't have to have a jersey from their child's last play hanging on the wall.
Coming in here and looking at that jersey, it's like wow, Abe, you really were a special individual, you know, because that's Abraham right there.
And we thank Elizabeth Alonso for sharing the story of her son. If you'd like to know what you can do to protect your athlete, you can see it all on KOAT.com.
Under the Target 7 section, you can search to see if your child's coach has taken the required concussion training. You can also see what other states are doing to prevent concussions.
We also have the entire game footage from Abe's play and behind-the-scenes look into his room. From all of us here at KOAT, good night.